In an act of vigilante justice, this woman killed the man who murdered her daughter in the middle of his trial. Growing up, Mary Ann Bachmeier did not have it easy. She had placed 2 babies up for adoption by the age of 18. So by the time her 3rd daughter, Anna, was born in 1973, she was ready to start over. She raised Anna as a single mom in Lübeck, Germany, and did everything she could to make her feel happy and loved. But on May 5th, 1980, when Anna was 7 years old, she skipped school after getting into a fight with her mom. She was then abducted by her neighbor, 35-year-old Klaus Grabowski, who was a convicted sex offender. Klaus had previously been arrested for sexually assaulting 2 other young girls and was voluntarily castrated in 1976, which was reportedly common back then in Germany to prevent offenders from reoffending. However, Klaus later underwent hormone therapy to try and reverse it, and this is important to remember. After abducting Anna, Klaus held her captive for several hours, reportedly sexually assaulted her, and eventually strangled her to death with a pair of his fiance's tights. He then put Anna into a cardboard box and left her on the bank of a canal. Klaus was arrested that night after his fiancée turned him in. After he was arrested, Klaus stated that he didn't intend to abuse her and that Anna, who was 7 years old, tried to seduce and extort him for money. He claimed to have panicked, and not wanting to go back to prison, he killed her. This obviously took a major toll on Mary Ann, whose young daughter's name was being dragged through the mud by this horrible man. So on March 6, 1981, on the 3rd day of Klaus's trial, Mary Ann snuck a .22 caliber pistol into the Lübeck District Court and shot him 7 times in the back, killing him almost instantly. Klaus's attorneys tried arguing that he'd only simply acted out due to a hormone imbalance caused by the hormone therapy after being castrated. During Mary Ann's trial for killing Klaus, a doctor who had examined her asked her for a handwriting sample in which Mary Ann wrote, quote, "I did it for you, Anna," end quote, surrounded by 7 hearts. Mary Ann was convicted of premeditated manslaughter in 1982 and sentenced to 6 years in prison, but she was later released after only serving 3. This became the most well-known case of vigilante justice in what was West Germany. In an interview 10 years later, Mary Ann stated that she shot Klaus after careful consideration and to prevent him from further spreading horrible lies about Anna. Mary Ann died on September 17, 1996 at just 46 years old from pancreatic cancer. She was buried right next to Anna.
My friend met a guy on Tinder and went on a few dates with him for about a month. One day, she decided after a date to finally invite him to her house for a drink. During these drinks, she started feeling some weird vibes from him, so when it was time to go to bed, she asked him if he would be okay with sleeping on the couch in the living room. He said yes. For some reason, she decided to lock her bedroom. She's always been a little bit paranoid, and then she went to sleep. In the middle of the night, she heard her door handle move. She woke up and asked him, "Are you okay?" thinking maybe he was looking for the bathroom, and he didn't answer. She got very spooked and called the police. The police arrived, and she warily opened the door and told them he was in the living room. A police officer went into the living room down the hall and came back. He got on his walkie-talkie immediately and told her not to go into the living room. Apparently, there was a bunch of knives in the living room floor and plastic over some of the furniture. Had she not locked the door, she would probably be dead. Always trust your gut
Holy
instincts.
fuck, that's one of the craziest stories we've had on this pod if it's real.
Mental.
It's not that bad, I can explain. That is a baby estrelid finch, and yeah, that's what they're supposed to look like. This is what they look like all grown up. Those markings help the parents decide which chicks to feed and which chicks to let die. And that's because some birds will lay their egg in the nest of another and let the other bird raise their baby. Matter of fact, you know the first 4 letters of the word cuckoo? This is where that term comes from. So those specific markings help the mother avoid feeding a chick that isn't actually hers. And oftentimes, it's a chick with the brightest markings that gets the most food and attention from the parents. It's not racism, but it's in the area code. Once the chicks become old enough to feed themselves, the birthmarks start to fade away. Only problem is some brood parasite chicks have evolved to have similar markings to the others, which tricks the parents into feeding them as well, which usually screws the other demigorgons in the nest in the process. Cause sometimes evolution means you just get cuckooed, but you know, with the O silent. Moral of this video, work smarter, not harder.
felt chilled as I came downstairs for breakfast on a Saturday morning and heard the news. A reporter was following the story of an escaped convict, a convict by the name of Barry Marshall. But in the public mind, he was better known by his nickname, Big Red. His string of serial murders had come to be known as the Big Red Killings. The reason for the name was twofold. The term big came from the fact that Barry Marshall was a very large man, but it also referred to the location of the murders, the Big Apple, New York City. The word red referred to both his style of killing and his preferred victims. Every one of his victims had been found strung from their feet with slits in their throats. This allowed for the most amount of blood possible to spew out onto the ground below. He drained them like animals to be butchered. As for his preferred victims, he seemed to exclusively target women with red hair. I was more familiar with his motives, his actions, his desires than anyone else. 3 years prior, I had been the detective who had finally caught him. It was my collected evidence that brought 8 life sentences down on Barry Marshall for his 8 murders. And there, in my living room, on an ordinary Saturday, some stranger was telling me that this man had escaped. My wife, who had been pouring pancake batter into a pan, turned to me with a confused expression. And behind the confusion was a shaking terror. I reached for my phone when it started ringing. I answered. Before I even said anything, the frantic voice of my boss said, "Todd, I'm sorry you've heard already. I don't know what happened, but why the hell did I have to find out from a news station that the man I put away for 8 lifetimes is now on the loose?" I demanded, with a mix of rage and fear. "Todd, I'm so sorry. We're trying to figure that out on our end. No one knows what's going on right now. We thought it was a false report at first, but, well, he really is gone. We're sending protection to your house right now. Just a precautionary measure, of course. But until we find him, you and your family should go somewhere safe." I wanted to yell, but I knew it wouldn't help anything. "That's fine. Thanks, Hank," I said without emotion and hung up. I tossed my phone onto the lounge chair by the window and turned to my wife. The rest of the day went by in a blur. 2 officers arrived and explained the situation. We would be temporarily moving to a hotel room, since we still lived in the same house we had lived in when I had sent Big Red to the state penitentiary. He might have remembered where we lived. The 2 officers would then remain with us until Big Red was found and returned to his cell. The precaution and the fear all stemmed from the final words uttered by Barry Marshall as he was ushered out of the courtroom. He looked right at me and said, "When I get out, they're gonna have to call me Big Blondie." And he laughed. Many were confused by this remark, but his statement was clear to me. It was a direct threat on my wife and daughter, who both had blonde hair. The implication being that he would depart from his ordinary list of victims just to seek revenge on me. It took everything I had to remain calm for my wife. It took everything I had to remain calm for my wife and daughter. Fortunately, my 5-year-old was too young to understand the situation and be afraid. As we tossed and turned in our hotel bed that night, I realized that in the panic, I had forgotten my phone. I needed to feel some level of control and normalcy, so I got out of bed and headed for my car. I was stopped by one of our guards, and he told me that there was no chance he would let me go back to my home that night. However, he agreed to go and recover my phone for me. Reluctantly, I returned to bed. I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the officer informed me that he had not found my phone, but more importantly, there had been a break-in at my home. The window had been shattered, but nothing inside seemed to be disturbed. He warned me not to jump to any conclusions, but I already knew that it had to be Big Red. I rummaged through the bag I had brought to the hotel room. A sigh of relief escaped my lips when I found that I had at least brought my work phone. I unlocked it. The phone was connected to my personal phone, and I opened the Find My Phone app. A location popped up. I stared. I hadn't expected it to work, but there it was. I don't know why Big Red had stolen my phone, but now we could head straight for him. I called my boss. He answered. "Hey Todd, good to hear from you. How did the relocation go? I hope that—" "Hank," I interrupted. "I have him. I know where he is." "You, what?" "Big Red. He broke into my home and stole my phone. I don't know why, but I am tracking his location right now for my work phone." Todd, we don't even know for sure that he's the one who broke into your house. You're not really going to pass this lead up, are you?" I asked, my anger steadily rising. "No, of course not. I'll head to the location right away. I just don't want you—" "I'm coming with you." "No, Todd, absolutely not. I know him better than anyone, Hank. Please. He's threatening my family. I have to do this. I won't do anything stupid, but I have to come. After a bit more back and forth, Hank finally agreed to let me come with him and a small team of officers who would search the location. They picked me up at the hotel, and I assured my family that I would be safe as I said goodbye. We tracked the location of my phone to an old warehouse, but as we neared, the location suddenly disappeared. My personal phone had stopped transmitting its location. I began to sweat for fear that Big Red would get away. We reached the warehouse, and the team of officers kicked the door in. I followed shortly after with Hank. The warehouse was completely empty, except for the horror in the middle of the room. Dangling from the ceiling was a woman. She was hanging from her feet. Her neck was slit. A massive puddle of blood pooled beneath her head. The red blood matched her red hair. A bit behind the puddle was a message crudely written in blood. The message said, "Still red, for now. But who's next, Todd?" My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure if I was angry or terrified, but I knew what the message meant, and I had been right.
You can see, oh no, why are all your feelings pulling off the show? But you're the only one clapping in the front row. Is faking it the only thing you know? Oh no, and after all this time everybody knows. When everybody's crying, you overflow. If you can handle it, just let it go. Oh no, 'cause true colors don't blend. 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 They don't blend. 'Cause true colors don't blend.
The message was a promise that he would kill again, and this time, he might target my wife and daughter. Big Red had stolen my phone, and he was using it to toy with me. He had led me to his victim, but made sure that he would be gone by the time I arrived. Hank called in an investigation team to comb the warehouse and surrounding area for any evidence that might lead to Big Red. "Go back to your family, Todd," Hank said. "I'm sorry you had to see this. I don't want you anywhere near this case anymore." "But the location," I blurted. "We can track him. I can help you find him." "I linked it to my phone," Hank said. "I'll keep checking to see if a location pops up, but I doubt we'll catch him that way. We need to get ahead of him. He's too smart to give up his location on accident. If we follow it, we'll probably just barely miss him like we did this time." "But I need to come with you. I need to catch him, Hank. No," Hank said sternly. "You need to go back to your family, because your family needs you. Please, Todd, don't make this difficult." I turned back to the upside-down woman in the middle of the large room. Dried blood completely covered her face. It curved around her lips and into her gaping mouth, which was frozen in a scream of terror. I couldn't help but imagine my wife's face, my daughter's face, frozen with that same expression, covered in that same blood. I nodded at Hank. "Okay, I'll go back." Hank squeezed my shoulder. "We'll get him, Todd, I promise." I forced a smile and headed back to a patrol car that returned me to the hotel that had become a prison to my family and I. Big Red's sadistic freedom was imprisoning us. We wouldn't be free until he wasn't. Back at the hotel, I embraced my wife and daughter tightly. My wife couldn't hold back anymore, and she began to sob. This frightened our daughter and caused her to sob as well. I continued to hold them until their tears stopped. Eventually, they found a bit of distraction by watching a game show on the hotel television. But I was checking my work phone, opening and closing the Find My iPhone app repeatedly. I eyed my bag. Inside was a gun. Not the gun I used at work. Hank had not let me keep that. In my bag was a personal weapon, and the second I saw a location appear on my work phone, I would go and do what I needed to do to protect my family. But things didn't go the way I had expected. In fact, things didn't go the way anyone had expected. That night, a location appeared on my phone. It revealed that my personal phone was just outside our hotel room. Big Red was there. I cursed myself for being so stupid. I had been tracking my personal phone, but Big Red had been tracking my work phone. He knew exactly where we were. I jumped from the bed and reached into my bag when a gunshot rang into the night. I opened the hotel room door. It was over. Both guards had their guns drawn. A small wisp of smoke rose from one of the barrels. In the middle of the hotel courtyard was Big Red. He was flat on his back, a hole in the center of his forehead. In his left hand, he held a knife. In his right hand, he clutched my phone. Blood poured out the back of his head and pooled around him, like it had for all his victims. I stared. I should have felt relieved. It was all over. Barry Marshall was dead. But a dreadful array of confused thoughts flooded my mind. Why had he come here like this? He had basically given himself up. He was a smart man who had avoided capture for years. He had escaped a maximum security prison. He had rushed the hotel courtyard to hurt my family, but he must have known he would be shot down. He must have known that there was no hope of reaching us. His dead face bore a hideous, nightmarish smile. I suddenly understood. He was smiling because he had won. I wasn't free now that he was dead. I was imprisoned in my own shame and failure. He had brutally murdered a woman just to get back at me. My name had been written with her blood, and he had known where my family was hiding due to my own stupidity. He had been in complete control, and he wanted me to know that. He wanted me to know that there was no freedom for me, even though he was dead. I thought I could hear laughter emanating from the smiling corpse, and that laughter would follow me for the rest of my life.